Okay, we'll start to let everybody in. Roderick, you want to? Hello, welcome to the meeting. We're just getting started. We're going to let everybody in from the waiting room. Give us about 5 minutes before we get going. If you can change your name, please go to the participants button at the bottom of your screen. Hover over your name and click more and rename. If you can put your first and your last name and maybe your affiliation, that would be great, so we know who you are. If you are calling in from a phone number, if you can text 337-781-6470 and give us your first and last name, we'll know that you're on the call. It's nice to see everybody's faces again. Hope everybody had a nice holiday. We're just going to give it a few minutes before we get started.
Sure appreciate everybody giving up some time for us on a beautiful afternoon like today.
Okay, we're still letting some more people in from the waiting room. As a reminder, can you just please change your name in the participant section at the bottom of your screen? You can hover over your name and click on rename and put your first and last name and your affiliation. Or if you're calling in from a phone, you can text 337-781-6470 and give us your first and last name and we'll know you're on the call. We'll give it about 2 more minutes and make sure we give people enough time to log in. Okay, just 1 more minute and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. We'll let some more people in the waiting room if they join us after, but we can go ahead and kick it off if we want to throw it to Tim.
Thanks, Brady. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this evening again to delve more into the understructured uses along the corridor and for this project, I-49 Lafayette connector between I-10 and basically the airport. We look forward to see what ideas you have, and we want to document that and put that together with all the other workshop information we have and see what we can do to make this project somewhat unique and special to Lafayette. I think this meeting's from 4 to 6. And with that, I hope we have plenty of participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping and Derek will take us through the agenda, but we are going to have everyone in this main session on mute initially to avoid background noise and so we can get through some of the presentation. We will break out into 2 breakout rooms this time. All LCAG members will be unmuted in the breakout room so you can have conversation and get input. If there's any members of the public that are on the phone, we ask that you participate in listen only mode. And if you have any questions, you can email info@LafayetteConnector.com. The chat feature is available for LCAG members as well. You can put your questions in there if you'd like, but it will be open discussion in the breakouts. And we have about an hour for the breakouts. And then we'll come back and report back out where everyone in the main session will be on mute again, but able to use the chat feature for any questions. It looks like I don't need to go over some of the other housekeeping items. It looks like we're all using our phones properly and Zoom properly. So with that, I will kick it over to Derek.
All right. Thank you, Bree. Thank you, Tim. It's going to be a great night. As Bree suggested, when we get into discussions, it'll be wide open. And we really thought that was important because we also want to see conversation among y'all, not just back and forth with us. If there are members of the public listening in tonight, we're glad that you're listening in. This is sort of like a committee meeting, so you don't really get a chance to be on the committee exactly. But that being said, we do want to hear from you. There's a number of neighborhood engagements and wide open public meetings coming up. We want you in the process for sure. So thank you for dialing in and showing the extra interest to be on the call tonight. So I'll walk you through the agenda briefly here. We're going to repeat just a few of the slides you saw before, just a few of the slides just to remind us all what we're talking about here. And then we want to show you how we're breaking up the sub areas. And we're just breaking up the sub areas for the purposes of this design conversation. Those are not sub areas that are going to dictate districts or distinctive looks or distinctive zoning or uses or anything of that sort. We just had to break up the corridor in some way to have the conversation about areas that are most important to your neighborhoods. And then we're going to do 2 breakout groups. And each group is going to have 2 urban designers. One is going to be pushing the buttons, as I would say, meaning that they're going to operate a system that enables you to give comment and see your comment manifest in the designs in some preliminary way. And the other person is going to facilitate the conversation and not have to worry about pushing any buttons. So this is sort of like if we were all here together, we would show you a few slides and then we would go over to some long tables that have long maps on them and we'd start to talk and y'all would be marking things up and you'd give us ideas and you'd put sticky notes on the map. That's what we're doing tonight. We're just doing it digitally with digital sticky notes and digital arrows and digital pens and markers instead. But I think you'll find that it'll work for you. And we want to see, we want you to see the input as it comes together. Then we'll all actually do a formal summary of this so you'll be able to check back later and see sort of what the group was coming up with. We'll do the typical reporting back at the end and then have closing remarks. So what we're here to do is a continuation of workshop 3A. We want to hear from agencies, organizations, and neighborhoods about the uses, about the aesthetics, about the concerns, about the dreams that you might have in terms of programming all of these spaces. We also want to get enough input so that we have some things to talk about with the neighborhoods. We've got a number of neighborhood engagements coming up. Obviously, COVID has pushed those back, but we're looking at various means of getting input, which will include some live meetings and some other techniques. And in those, we want to ask them, sort of a tabula rasa, what would you like in your neighborhood? But we also want to tell them what other folks are talking about and get their feedback. So if everyone wants A or everyone wants B in these sessions, we can take those to the neighborhoods and see what they think about A or think about B. It'll be very important to do that. And then obviously, as we hear from y'all, as we hear from the neighborhoods, things are going to start to congeal and get closer and closer to concepts that can be put on the map and introduced as part of the preferred alternative, at least in a conceptual way. And then those would be the programs and the uses that would be the source of or the subject of a joint use development plan and agreement in the future. I don't think I need to remind you about the opportunity that we have here, almost 4 miles of elevated interstate here with lots of opportunities for different things underneath. Lots of places that your daily commute or your weekend activities might interface with this corridor. I want you to think about ways that you want to interface there. And I hope, in the second bullet there, you see that we really want to hear from the community, and we're hoping that y'all have been able to chit chat with colleagues and neighbors and family members through the holidays, and can bring some of that to this conversation. Just as a recap, there's the body of evidence, right, as to what has previously been talked about. A number of these things are directly applicable to this topic. The desires for parks and plazas, festival spaces, those occasional spaces. And we want you to think about the daily programs and activities in the look, as well as the occasional ones, and the mix of those two. You see stormwater mentioned here, detention, retention facilities. Then we've been talking to y'all, right? So those were from plans that y'all developed without us in the room. Now we've been in the room for a few years, and we've been having this conversation. We've been collecting some input. Over the last, I'd say 6 weeks, we've gone back around and have some refresher conversations with some organizations like the Downtown Association, like the city, and said, all right, we're about to have this workshop. Have you been thinking about this? Has anything changed? We asked them if there were new technical data. Maybe someone's done an analysis of what kind of parks are needed or what parking utilization's like, that sort of thing. From those conversations, these are some of the things that we were hearing. Somewhat akin to what we were hearing back in December when we had the first part of this discussion. We heard a lot of talk about stormwater management, the surface treatment of surface stormwater. A lot of talk about connectivity. Almost everybody's really interested in using this project to reconnect the community. And I think part of that's physical, making sure the sidewalks go through, making sure you can get to the space, and also part of it's social. Providing that space for the social encounters, farmers markets, events, right? So neighbors see each other, you're catching up, you're telling tales about what else has happened in the neighborhood. That kind of cohesion really is improved by, an active use that's drawing folks together. Both of those are very important. We've talked about the operations and maintenance responsibilities and how the DOTD and FHWA have limitations. Obviously, they build transportation facilities. They don't build dog parks and carousels, right? They also have a limited ability to operate and maintain things in the long haul, right? They're not going to come and maintain a farmer's market for y'all exactly, but they could potentially provide a lot of space and shade and rain cover and that sort of thing. So the O&M responsibility is the big part of this conversation. We're trying to get concepts now, but eventually we need to figure out who's going to manage those concepts, fund those concepts. That's very related to the fourth bullet here, which is focusing on certain areas. We're probably not going to have a robustly programmed and aesthetically uplifted 4-mile stretch. There's going to be certain notes that are more intense than others. And I think you'll get a real feel for that when we start working through the sub areas and see where you can and cannot do some of these bigger ideas. Some of the ideas have been, as we mentioned, occasional ideas, farmers markets, special event space. Those can be married with more permanent features. The The designers can do clever things in that regard. And I have a couple tales to tell in that regard I'll get to later. And then lastly, especially from some of the folks who, whose charge it is to think about these things, we've heard a lot of talk about how the whole corridor really needs to have a holistic, comprehensive plan and sense to it, that we could get the understructure uses right and the structure right, but then what happens adjacent to it in terms of joint use, in terms of development, the massing and footprint of the buildings adjacent to it, the connectivity, as we had already mentioned, the signage, right? It would build a beautiful bridge, but then you line it in attorneys' billboards, right? And you've undermined part of what you attempted to achieve. So that's part of the conversation, only limitedly under the jurisdiction, obviously, of anybody in the LCP team to influence. But we think that it's important to think about both, especially in terms of one use supporting another. And I've got a slide on that coming up. So just a reminder, and one of the reasons we're reminding you of some of these local sites is because you might want to visit one, right? I've visited a couple of these recently, and just, I'm under there and I'm listening and I'm thinking about having a conversation. I'm thinking about how it would feel to spend a lot of time there, crossing under there. So we're starting with the Red River District in Shreveport, which is a good example because it's maybe has some shortcomings, but it's essentially the whole package. They've got great aesthetics. They've done art. They've done landscaping. There's good color. There's good light. They've also got great programming. There are occasional events here. There's an annual a festival underneath here that draws hundreds and hundreds of folks under there. And they've also figured out all the adjacent use stuff, right? Those buildings were actually built for this district to be formed. And tax increment financing was used very innovatively in being able to do so. So it's sort of the whole package in a way. It's a very good example to see. The bridge is higher than or the structure is higher than our structure will be, but still a good site to visit and think about how that feels. Juxtaposed from that is Jackson Street in Alexandria. This is actually over 71, US 71, not 49 or under, I should say. And it's not programmed and there's no festivals there. It was just a dark corridor that people didn't walk under. And now it's a very compelling corridor that people are going out of their way to be able to walk under. Similarly, PARISITE skate park. It's off of Paris Street. It's in New Orleans, just east of City Park. If you want to come and take a look at how that functions and how that feels. Any of the things, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, we'd be glad to meet you there and talk out loud with you about the sites. This one's at the Convention Center in New Orleans. It serves an interesting use, but it's not a great example of what the feel would be like under ours. The level of urban development is very different. The bridge, the structure is very, very high in the air compared to ours. Not the best example. I wouldn't encourage you to necessarily go out of your way to visit it. This is a very traditional example with an integrated use adjacent and under the structure, easily visited. You can go there and play and look around, bring a dog, bring a child, etc. In Baton Rouge, you're probably familiar with these. You've probably seen these, and there's not a whole lot of visiting to be done. And then on the other side of the slide is the Claiborne corridor, which is a good visit. It's good to think about. There's a lot of talk about the Claiborne corridor and how that's working, and some great examples of art. Less so of programming, though there are some programming thoughts underway, and as an initiative to bring more programming underneath it. Expressway Park in Baton Rouge, some similar heights, not necessarily so similar in width, but it's a good place to move around to get a feel for what it could be like under a structure of that sort. So I don't know if any of you had a chance to visit any of those. We do, once we break out, we'd like to hear any reflections that you would have had, especially as those might constrain the options that we are thinking about for these uses under the structure. So what we're going to do in a short while is break out and look at sub areas. The sub areas have evolved a bit since we talked to you last, but what we're going to do first is listen to any input that you have for all the sub areas and then walk through them. But first, the designers are going to show you each space and give you a sense of what is really possible there. Some places you can see under it, some places you can be under it. And in some cases, those, access is impeded or visual access is impeded. So we'll help you understand sort of the sandbox that you have to work with, sub-area by sub-area. And then we'll wrap it up. So I believe, Bree, with that, we probably are 5 minutes ahead.
I think before we go into the breakout sessions, we were just going to kind of quickly show the corridor
That's right.
the breakdown of the sub areas, and then we're going to actually break out so that we can go over each of those in detail.
Thank you.
So
I'll stop sharing my screen then.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen briefly, and this is just to introduce everyone on the call tonight to what we're going to do in the breakout session in about 10 minutes time. So let's see here. I'm going to minimize this. Let me know if folks can see my screen.
Yep, see it.
Okay, great. So what we're introducing here for the next few minutes before we go into the breakout rooms is the technology that we're going to make use of tonight in order to document and record all of the input that folks give us. And as you already know, we're going to divvy up this group into two, and that's basically to allow for more intimate conversation and just kind of, the whole point is to get as much input from you folks as we can. But before we do that, I just wanted to kind of show you, when last we met for the first half of this workshop, we introduced the notion that that the corridor itself might be broken into sub areas, and that by doing so, it would help us imagine different programming that's appropriate at different points along that corridor. And at that point, we were kind of showing everybody three general sub areas, one around the Calise Saloon interchange, one that's kind of at the central portion of the corridor that touches all of these many neighborhoods, and then another corridor at the northern another sub area at the northern end of the corridor around Willow Street. And what we wanted to do for tonight was to break that down further, and that would, I think, help facilitate a more detailed conversation that's focused on adjacent neighborhoods, adjacent land uses, adjacent character, that kind of thing. And so what we've done is taken the 5 sub areas that we, the 3 sub areas that we showed you last time, and we've broken them into 5. And roughly that is, again, still Willow Street, which is from the northern end of the corridor to about the railroad crossing. And then a segment that abuts both Sterling Grove and Laplace. And that goes from the railroad to Simcoe, essentially. And then again, the central core that we looked at more closely last time. And that's more or less unchanged, with the exception of we wanted to have a 4th area here where the character does change a bit when you're leaving the central business district. So essentially Freetown, Puerto Rico and Macomb Vise touch 2 of these sub areas. And these are not real lines. These are imaginary lines. So it's not to say that programming that's applicable to the central core has to stop at 11th Street. It could in theory spill over, but the idea is we're trying to compartmentalize zones because we don't anticipate that the entire length will be programmed, but that there's opportunities in each of these sections where some amount of programming might make sense. The other thing I just want to point out is the color coding that you see for the 5 sub areas, that represents the portions of the corridor that are elevated. So the corridor itself will run from this kind of southern terminus all the way up to connecting into I-10. However, it's only these zones that are shown in color that are actually vertically elevated above grade. There's moments where it will touch back down near the airport for obvious reasons, crossing the river before it rises back up, and then has this long run of an elevated section before touching back down again at grade just before I-10. So I just wanted to kind of walk through that for clarity. And then I'm just going to give you like a sneak peek of what we'll be looking at in the breakout sessions in a couple of minutes. Again, we showed you these 2 programming slides last time. This is not meant to suggest that these are the only programming themes that one could dream up, but it's just to kind of get the conversation going. The idea that there might be active programming, more aesthetic-based programming like art, more naturalistic programming, because we see that as actually a programming element, naturalized landscapes, stormwater management, multi-use pathways and trails, you know, which could include a bicycle facility, active sports, and, you know, all kinds of things, seating areas, flexible use space like public markets and festival sites. So these are all just to get the idea, you know, the conversation going, and to, you know, basically show that many things are possible under elevated structures. And then what we're going to do is in just a minute break into those sub area groups. And what we've done is for each of the 5 sub areas that I've just outlined, we have a board set up which looks at that sub area in much more detail. And so I'll just zoom in on Willow here for a second. And what we have are these Post-it notes that each administrator in the 2 sub areas will be able to use to record comment. This will allow us to look at these sub areas in a much more detailed way. We can zoom in on things, we can point to things, we're able to actually draw on the screen. And then we pre-populated each sub area with these sticky notes to just help us categorize themes. So for example, urban design elements, which could be anything from lighting, gateway components, wayfinding, things like that, seating, all that kind of stuff might fall into that category. Active use, which is like, you know, multi-use fields, sports courts, skate park, whatever, that's all kind of active use. The notion of connectivity having its own topic because it's been such a point of focus, sidewalks, bicycles, multi-use paths, that kind of thing. Passive use, as mentioned a minute ago, naturalistic landscape treatments, stormwater management, you know, even trails and seating areas fall into that category. The idea that art might be its own topic, you know, and that could be anything from art that's incorporated in the piers that support the elevated or other ways. And then we kind of have a miscellaneous notes Post-it note here, which could be used to track any number of things that come up in the conversation. So, you know, our dialogue is not, you know, I guess, restrained by these categories. We have the ability to add any notations onto these boards that might come up. But I just wanted to kind of introduce this concept. And really the idea is this session is being recorded. So we have that to refer back to. And then each of these boards, which will be notated in the 2 breakout sessions, will also have the ability to be exported so that we can catalog all the information that we hear. And at the end of this session, we'll be all coming back into one room and do a brief reporting back. And that will help for folks that are in, let's say, breakout room 1 to hear what was said in breakout room 2 and vice versa. So essentially that's the way we've approached this, and we think it will be very effective. So we hope to have a really exciting conversation. I think we're ready probably now to break into the 2 rooms.
Thank you, Anthony. Okay, so we are going to break out into 2 rooms. You've been assigned to a room. You either will go straight there or have to click join if it pops up on your computer screen. If you leave the room, you probably won't be able to get back in the room. So if you could stay in the room, that would be great. And there'll be a notification in about an hour and 10 minutes. And it will kick us all back into the main room when we're done.
Welcome back, everybody. That was exciting. I could barely keep up with the notes of that conversation in breakout room 2. We're going to do a little reporting back and hear what the other groups had said. So it makes sense to start with group 1. You're muted, good sir.
All right.
I was hoping to be able to catch my breath, or maybe, you know, check or pass for a minute. I can start. We said a lot of stuff. It was great. We had some fantastic discussions, and really, I really was, my pencil's dull. Up at Willow, there's really interesting. There's a lot of talk about opening up the interchange for green space and some trails through there. Connectivity was a huge issue. That's where you now get the Welcome to Lafayette with the visitor center. But wayfinding is a big deal. We need to have cross connections is a monster problem that's must be dealt with. It currently has a wetland feel in a lot of areas. Would like maybe to keep that wetland feel, and it's a good area for possibly using for drainage. Lighting is important on Willow to make it safe, obviously, for pedestrians and bikes. The visitor center, that if it was back there and it had adjacent things to do, would make sense. So you'd stop there and you'd get oriented and then maybe go get something else from an adjacent business. Right now, there's pretty poor safety and pedestrian access. There could be some recreational use in there if you incorporate it with the water, such as maybe canoeing or kayaking and stuff. It's the biggest green open space around, but the question is, how do you get to it and where do you park? So if we turn it into a passive sort of green space, there's got to be accommodations for folks to come to it. Someone thought that there might be more active uses, such as either a skate park or a miniature golf putt place, or maybe some basketball. And then someone else suggested that there's a charter school right adjacent to it. Maybe there might be some connection with that for them to make use for a community garden or one of the things that they might want to use it for. Going south to Laplace and Sterling Grove, if we're going to have a walkway that was talked about under the Willow area, to continue that walkway down from Willow to the next area, Laplace Sterling Grove, such that if you're in Laplace or Sterling Grove and you wanted to go up to the green space, you'd use the connection of the walkway. Inter-area connectivity between the two sides was a huge issue, and making that continuous walking path with lighting is very important, along with, again, wayfinding for the historic districts and historic attention. We know that there could be very much like a High Line kind of a thing with connectivity, and that's the spine off of which you branch from neighborhoods to get to other neighborhoods north and south. But really what we also determined was we got to talk to the neighbors here and find out more about what is their recreational needs, active and passive. So that conversation has to happen. In the next section in Macomb-Bizet in downtown, we had all kinds of uses, for active uses and then farmer market kind of thing. It could be because it's adjacent to an art district. We could have a lot more art there. It's a good place to have a skate park. There's a skating store close to it, and there are skaters in the area at Parc Sans-Souci. But the cross connection between Macomb-Bizet and downtown is paramount. We thought very strongly that the idea of making 6th Street a maybe pedestrian only connection from one side to the other would really encourage that cross connectivity and the tying of the two sides back together again. That was a really big deal. Make sure that it's well lit, obviously. Someone suggested that a dog park might work here. We thought that there was some opportunities for multi-use festival space and green space in the area between the overhead structure and the tracks. And also somebody brought up the concept of bioremediation using plantings for further attenuation of the environmental issues. Parking was brought up because that's low-hanging fruit for understructure uses, especially if there's a parking demand that a concessionaire might want to look at. And then the idea of it being an electric or scooter bike station where you park your car, get a bike or a scooter, and then go into downtown and do your business down there is something that might be accommodated here because it's right there at Jefferson and 6th. So that was all pretty good ideas. Getting down to Freetown, Puerto Rico, and more Macomb-Bizet, again, connectivity is number one, both north and south and east and west. Looking at the commercial activity that may happen or may change at Pinhook was discussed. And we want to make sure that people see the opportunities there after this project is over. And then we want to know, what is the pathway to downtown from here, and how do you get to major events if you're coming up from the south and in the neighborhoods, how do you get to those events there? Lastly, we closed up with Khalees Saloom. Seems like native landscape was something that might be work out here. Looks like Hugh Wallace is probably going to get more use because everybody wants to maybe avoid this place. And finally, taking the opportunity of using this one single open space here for a very large piece of metal sculpture. I'll stop talking now because my throat hurts. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you. I hadn't heard Putt Putt yet, or Urban Orchard, the Scooter Hub. That's all fun stuff. So Jimena, Anthony, how would you compare and contrast Group 2's input with that?
Actually, for the first area, for the Willow Street area, very compatible. We heard a lot of concern about safety there. Pedestrians just did not have the safety they needed to be walking or biking in this area. And so connectivity was a huge issue and so a concern. We also heard that they wanted landscaping, passive space, again, stronger ped and bike connectivity. We've heard an idea for a bus hub, which is what you see there in the blue, outlined in the blue with the blue lines. We also heard an idea about an art piece. Since this is the northernmost part of the corridor, it would be an ideal place to have a gateway, an art piece to announce the entry into this area. And also drainage was also something that the group expressed they wanted to see there, but ample connectivity overall for pedestrian and bicyclists. Let me see, also an independent path underneath the structure that wasn't attached to the main streets around it. Let me see, did I miss anything, Anthony? All right, we'll move on to the next one.
Sounds like Anthony's muted.
I am.
Oh, did I miss anything or did I capture?
I think you've got everything, you know, lighting to ensure safety. You know, really like in some of these ped and bicycle and connectivity in general was a key thing.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, in this Laplace Sterling Grove sub area, we heard about, I think Neil mentioned a multi-use path to Pinhook. So connecting, having a bike path all the way to Pinhook. And I think several people agreed with him that this was a good idea. Again, the safety for pedestrians and bicyclists was a huge concern for everyone and wanted us to keep that in mind when looking at this corridor and the types of projects that might go into this area. Also focus on how to keep the area to the west from being an island or blocked off. So that also goes to addressing connectivity. Then there was let me see what else was there. An active space. Somebody mentioned that they wanted to see some active space, maybe an area, a pedestrian area to walk their dog or something of that sort. Now moving into the central core area.
Oh, nice scribbles.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. But a big concern about the site was the contamination. So we heard people express that they wanted a more hardscape treatments to go underneath the structure. And so with that said, maybe parking could be one of those uses, which would also help with the festivals that they have here, and also give a space to park for the downtown. Something was also said about the columns, giving some artistic treatment to the columns. And especially at Johnson Street. And this could be expanded to the whole area or other areas. With this area, the green scribbles that you see there, an idea was that they could probably put the stormwater treatments in the parking underneath the structure. In that way, this space could allow for more developable area around this in the green space. So make this land more developable and put the other kinds of uses underneath the structure. Moving on to Freetown, Puerto Rico. What we heard was a linear path. They wanted to see a linear path along here. A concern was light pollution control and also noise reduction due to the residential nature of the adjacent neighborhoods. So downlighting and noise reduction. Don't know if I already mentioned the multi.
That I had noted, you know, we heard about the idea of multi-use paths or some kind of a corridor that's for non-motorized users that might run through many of these sub areas. But the idea came up when we were on this section of having potential pit stops, if you will, at various points along that linear system where people can stop. If they're on their bike, let's say, there might be seating, there might be, you know, amenities at strategic points along the corridor.
Water fountain. Also detention, I think stormwater treatment or detention was also mentioned.
Yeah, and the red that's circled here is just because there's some, you know, questions about what the future use of the site might be, which, you know, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm just highlighting it here as it's adjacent and something folks are interested in knowing.
Right, and as we collected all these ideas, you know, there was a lot of concern about contamination and whether it was the right place for these types of things. And I think as we work through the project, we'll be able to determine, we heard your ideas, and so we will be the ones to determine what the better place for those are determined according to the contamination and all that of the site. So all ideas were welcome. Moving on to the last area, the Khaleesi Loom, also continuing with the connectivity, the high emphasis on the connectivity for bike and pedestrians. This was also a good place for a gateway. Yeah, there was mention that there isn't a safe way to cross the river, so all those pedestrian and bicycle connections will be taken into account. Anything else you'd like to add, Anthony, that I might have missed, or anybody?
I think the only other thing I'll note is it was something that I mentioned at this last one as well that might be applicable to all, is that future maps that we develop for future topics in workshops to come, we'll probably start doing like an overlay of adjacent either land use or districts or unique landmarks, et cetera, because I think it sounds like having that information start to be compiled and overlaid will be helpful for people to make more informed decisions for these specifically focused sessions.
Great. Thank you both. A lot of really good input. We will be developing a summary of this conversation. You know, congratulations. We've essentially completed now number 3 of 6 workshops. You know, in NEPA, we're supposed to have early and continual involvement. So think about this as early involvement. I know there's a lot of concerns about how's the traffic, where's the contamination, is that a historic building, et cetera. We do have all of those data. We have been looking at all of those data. Iteratively, more and more data is going to be presented. So eventually we're going to have a conversation about understructure uses at a time where you're going to see exactly where every sidewalk is, exactly where the signals are, how much traffic volume there is. But we don't want to wait to that point to get your input, right? So this is an early conversation. It'll be better informed when we come back around on it. It'll be better informed thanks to your input when we go out and talk to the neighborhoods and survey the neighborhoods over the next few months. So thank you all so much for that. I think a lot of you are excited to sort of get down to the ground, and we're getting there, right? So workshops 1 and 2, we were talking structure, superstructure, starting to get down to bents and retaining walls, then under structure uses. The next sessions are going to spread out into the city, so to speak. We're going to talk about the throughway. We're going to talk about local traffic. We're going to talk about urban design and the feel of it on the ground there. I think everyone's really going to feel engaged when we get to that point. I think you've been eager for it. We are eager for it as well. So I'll stop talking there. And I think Tim and Deidre may have closing remarks for us briefly.
Hi,
Sounds like we had a
everyone.
lot of good. Go ahead, Deidre.
Oh, no. Oh, okay. Really, we're not going to keep you guys any longer because we're basically at the end. Really, from DOTD, I just want to take the time to say thank you to everyone. We don't express it enough, or really probably could even do more, but I know you guys are taking a time out and you've been here. Some of you guys have been here with us from the very beginning. We know that this is an extensive process, but I really appreciate the input and the communication that you all have provided. It's helping us, guiding us as we're working along to get us to the actual finished product of the connector. So we really do appreciate it. And I just want to continue to say thank you to everyone.
Thanks, Deidre. Appreciate it. A lot of good information tonight, and we look forward to the future workshops we have, that we mentioned earlier.
Okay.
All right. Enjoy
Thank you,
your evening.
everybody.
Is that it?
Everybody.
We're at 6.
I'm gonna pray.
Have a good night.
I'm gonna play out.
Bye-bye.